"Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the line. First class is for our premium passengers." The words dropped like a gavel in the polished silence of Terminal B, slicing through air-conditioned stillness with surgical precision. James Bennett didn't flinch. He stood still, sleek black suit, boarding pass in hand, gold Rolex peeking beneath his cuff, and an expression so composed it almost looked bored. Seat 1A, the flight attendant, early 30s, white, tight bun, pinched smile, stared through him. Not at him, through him. As if his presence was an error her uniform had been trained to erase. She hadn't even looked at the name on the boarding pass. "I am a premium passenger," James said, voice calm, non-confrontational. She didn't blink. "Please step aside, or I'll call security." 2 rows back, a man in a golf cap chuckled. "Some people just can't read signs." James said nothing. Instead, he reached into his blazer pocket and made the call. "1 ring. Shut it down," he said. 2 minutes later, the entire departure board went red. Before we dive into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. James didn't move. The gate agent stood frozen, lips parted slightly, as if unsure what had just happened. Behind her, the digital board flickered again, this time with a sharp mechanical sound that seemed to echo down the terminal like a siren. More flights canceled, more passengers turning, whispering, panicking. But James, he stood still. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He didn't even look at the agent again. He just stood in line, one hand in his pocket, the other holding his phone, now silent and tucked away. The humiliation wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It wasn't even overt. It was quiet, clinical, wrapped in the pretense of protocol. Security hadn't arrived yet, but their shadows moved just beyond the glass wall of the terminal entrance. You could see them being called in, adjusting their jackets, touching their earpieces, readying for another misunderstanding. The flight attendant glanced at James again, her composure cracking like cheap porcelain. She tried to recover. "Sir, please, this area is for confirmed premium guests." James slowly raised the boarding pass again. 1A, his name, barcode scannable, printed by the airline's own system. But still, she didn't look, because the boarding pass was never the issue. The suit, the Rolex, the composure they should have screamed status. But for her, the one thing that screamed louder was his skin, and James knew it. He'd lived this dance before, in airports, in boardrooms, in cocktail parties where they called him articulate like it was a surprise. But what made this moment different wasn't what they said. It was what James didn't. He didn't explain. He didn't prove. He didn't plead. He had already done the only thing that mattered. He made the call. Behind him, a mother clutched her child's hand tighter. 2 businessmen swapped glances. The man in the golf cap laughed again. But the storm James had just triggered was already moving, silent and unstoppable. 2 agents appeared at the edge of the terminal now. They didn't head for the gate. They headed for the operations desk. James saw them out of the corner of his eye, saw the way the desk manager stiffened, reaching for a handset. They didn't know what was happening, but they knew something was. The agent who had denied James was now visibly shaking. A bead of sweat traced down her temple. She adjusted her scarf, tried to reset her stance, and finally really looked at James. And that's when she saw it. Not the pass, not the suit, not the watch. The eyes, unblinking, calm, but carrying something older than rage and sharper than any threat. Power. Real power doesn't shout. It waits. The flight attendant took a tiny step back. "Mr. Bennett!" a voice called from the side. It was Vanessa, his assistant, returning from the gate. Her heels clicked with purpose across the tile floor. "Gate 1A has been cleared," she said, holding her phone, screen still glowing with an internal operations memo. "They've grounded all flights, including ours." The agent's eyes darted between Vanessa and James, trying to process. I don't understand." James said nothing. Vanessa leaned in slightly, her voice low but precise. "You will." By now, murmurs were rising. Passengers had noticed the shift in tension. Someone was recording. Someone else was whispering into a phone. A man with a Bluetooth headset muttered, "Hold on. Something's happening here." And still, James didn't move, because this moment wasn't about proving anything. It was about letting them sit in it. The awkwardness, the wrongness, the slow, dawning realization that they had just tried to eject someone not from first class, but from power itself, and they failed. A small group of pilots near the crew entrance paused mid-conversation. One of them whispered to another, pointing toward James. "Is that him?" the younger one asked. The older pilot nodded grimly. "That's him." James's silence was louder than any protest. This wasn't a meltdown. It was a reckoning, and the gate agent knew it now. She tried to speak again, voice dry and crumbling. "Mr. Bennett, I didn't mean." But James didn't give her the relief of an answer. He turned his body slightly, not away, but forward. Toward the gate, toward whatever came next. Vanessa walked beside him as they passed through the scanner. No beep, no resistance, just wide eyes and cameras snapping from every angle. At the edge of the glass jet bridge, James paused. He didn't look back. He didn't speak. He just breathed. Slow, deep, measured. Because for the first time in a long time, they would have to explain themselves, not him. The video started with a shaky hand. Someone in the terminal had begun recording the moment James Bennett stood still, silent, as the departure board turned red behind him. The caption read, "Guy in first-class line made one phone call. Now the whole terminal's canceling within 10 minutes. It had over 200,000 views. By the time James walked past the gate, into the glass jet bridge, half the terminal was watching him, not just with curiosity, but confusion, awe, dread. At gate B7, a teenage girl nudged her mother. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the guy in the video. Are you sure? Look at the suit. Look at the watch." 3 college students by the Starbucks huddled around an iPad, screen mirrored from Twitter. Wait, this says he's a CEO, billionaire something. Dude just made a call and the whole airline shut down. Nah, that's some Succession-level energy. In the airline lounge, a woman in a Navy uniform paused mid-sip of her coffee. Her name tag read, K. Freeman, Flight Supervisor. She watched the monitors blink from on time to canceled one after another. Something was off. Something big. She tapped her comm button. "We've got a situation." But down on the concourse, the situation was unraveling faster than anyone could predict. A flight attendant from another gate stopped in her tracks as she saw James pass. She recognized him. Not from TV. Not from a conference. She recognized the look, the posture, the silence. That was the walk of someone who didn't need to explain himself. Not anymore. Passengers around the terminal began whispering more openly now. "Did you see what happened?" They tried to kick him out of first class. Why, you already know why. Another traveler, a middle-aged black man in a tailored coat, stood still, watching the screens. He didn't record. He didn't move. He just nodded once, like a truth long buried had finally walked into the light. At gate B9, a child asked his father, "Why are all the flights getting canceled?" His dad hesitated, then bent down to his level, because someone finally said no the right way. Meanwhile, inside the jet bridge, two ground agents stepped aside to let James through. Neither said a word. Vanessa, still beside him, was scrolling furiously through her phone. "James, it's going viral," she said under her breath. "The video of the call. The board flickering. Someone already tagged it." He made the call. James didn't answer. A camera flash caught the moment he turned to board. Another flash from the side captured Vanessa's tense expression. The images were already being uploaded with captions like, "Who is this man?" They picked the wrong one today. Silent power hits different. By now, the terminal wasn't just a building, it was a stage. People weren't just watching, they were choosing sides. Some passengers approached the counter and demanded answers. "What's going on? Why is my flight canceled?" But the airline reps had none, because they didn't know. In the command center, one floor above, managers shouted across cubicles, "Get legal on the line. Tell PR we've got a situation." Wait, what's his name again? James what? A junior associate looked up from her screen. James Bennett, CEO of Cortex Systems. The room fell silent. A senior officer cursed under his breath. "We just tried to block a man who built half our biometric boarding infrastructure." Someone else muttered, "We're dead." Downstairs, K. Freeman, the flight supervisor, reached the gate just in time to see the woman who had denied James slowly sink into a chair behind the counter. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes darted back and forth. She pulled out her phone, texting someone furiously, but nothing was working. Passengers nearby were staring at her now, cameras trained on her face. She was becoming a character in someone else's story. One whisper at a time, the narrative was slipping out of her control. A man behind her leaned forward. "You just tried to block the guy who basically owns half the sky." She turned to him. "I didn't know." He shook his head. "You didn't care." And just as she started to defend herself, another passenger stood up and began filming her directly. "Say it again," the woman said. "Say why you stopped him. Say why you didn't look at his ticket." The gate agent stood and fled into the back office, but it was too late. The witnesses had seen enough. The silence of James Bennett had spoken volumes, and the world was listening. Across the terminal, hundreds of voices rose, not in protest, but in realization. For once, the moment wasn't buried. For once, it was witnessed, and no one watching would ever see a boarding line the same way again. The chaos hadn't peaked yet. That would come later. But the escalation had begun, subtle, systemic, and sharp as a scalpel. 10 minutes after James Bennett passed through the jet bridge, Terminal B descended into a different kind of turbulence. Not the kind you feel at 30,000 feet, but the kind you feel in your bones when a system starts collapsing from the inside. The gate agent. Her name was Melinda Shaw, though no one would remember it until later had retreated to the supervisor's office, face pale, hands trembling. Inside, she replayed the moment over and over. Not the phone call, not the canceled flights, but the silence. The way James hadn't raised his voice, hadn't cursed, hadn't even scowled. It was worse than yelling. It was power without permission, and she had just tried to deny it boarding. Behind her, the supervisor, Freeman, was on a headset call with upper management. No, I don't have a confirmed ID yet. All I know is that someone made a call, and now our entire grid is canceling from JFK to LAX. No, I haven't spoken to legal yet because no one will confirm if we've triggered a red list protocol. She turned, looked at Melinda. You denied him first class. I didn't know who he was. Freeman's voice dropped like ice. You didn't check, I assumed. Yeah, that's the problem. Meanwhile, airport screens everywhere began to glitch. Not just the flight departures, gate systems, ID scanners, crew logs. Even the staff-only access doors flickered and rebooted. A system-wide sync event, something that wasn't supposed to happen without authorization from Cortex Systems itself. Passengers grew louder. At Gate B6, a family from Chicago demanded answers. Why did our flight to Dallas just get canceled? Is there a terror threat? A rumor started. A bomb threat. A cyber attack. Something foreign. Maybe. Someone said Russia. Someone else said AI gone rogue. The real answer. A black man in a $6,000 suit had simply had enough and made a call. In the executive tower, a VP from Skylink's operations division finally confirmed it. Cortex has revoked all active integrations across our tech stack. Meaning, every biometric scanner, every ticketing app, every auto-boarding system, they've all gone offline. Another exec paled. That's 84% of our infrastructure. They own it, the VP whispered. They built it. We lease it. And he just cut the cord. Back at the terminal, flight crews started to panic. A pilot, confused, stood at the window and watched a luggage truck stop mid-runway. Why's ground support frozen? No idea. You think this is a hack? Then another ping. Then another. Phones across the staff started buzzing simultaneously. Internal notices. System interruption. Please report to local supervisor. Do not board passengers until further notice. Passengers began to live stream. The trending hashtag from earlier, "He made the call," was now joined by two more. Grounded by truth. Boarding while black. At a CNN affiliate office in Midtown Manhattan, a junior producer pulled the clips off TikTok and dropped them into the editing bay. She didn't even need a script. The images spoke for themselves. A black man in silence. A screen blinking red. A corporation unraveling. The story was writing itself, but not everyone wanted it told. In the back office, Melinda Shaw was composing her version. On her phone, half hidden. She typed out a statement draft to send to internal HR. Passenger was belligerent, raised his voice, seemed aggressive, did not cooperate when asked to show ID. I feared for my safety. She stopped mid-sentence because her fingers were shaking too hard to type, and deep down, she knew none of that had happened. James hadn't even blinked aggressively. He had simply existed, and that had been too much. Meanwhile, in a secured conference room at Skylink HQ, the board gathered in emergency session. What's our exposure, all of it? What does Cortex want? Hard to say. James Bennett hasn't responded to any direct outreach. Someone asked, did we ever fix that contract dispute with him from 2 years ago? The silence in the room was deafening. No. Someone finally admitted. We cut his equity compliance clause out of the licensing deal, said it was too disruptive to restructure hiring. Another board member groaned. And now he's dismantling us in real time. Down on the floor of the terminal, a young woman in an airline uniform opened her personal TikTok app and quietly uploaded a 15-second video, James standing silent, the screen blinking red, Melinda pacing in the background. Her caption: "They did it again, but this time, he did something about it. The views hit 100,000 in the first 5 minutes." Upstairs in the lounge, Vanessa refreshed her feed. She turned to James. "You're trending worldwide." He nodded once. "And you're being called a villain, a hero, a mystery, and a movement." He exhaled. "All I did," he said quietly, "was refuse to move." Vanessa paused, "And the world moved around you." James sat in the lounge, elbows on knees, hands clasped in front of him. Outside the glass, Terminal B buzzed like a hornet's nest, but the private room around him felt still, suspended in time. Vanessa paced near the blinds, her phone buzzing every few seconds with media requests, legal updates, and panicked executives. But James wasn't looking at her. He wasn't looking at the screen, either, which now displayed a live CNN ticker reading Tech CEO grounds. Airline after first-class incident details emerging. He was looking at the past, and the past looked back. 3 years ago, a gala in San Francisco, polished marble floors, waiters in black vests, laughter that echoed like wealth on display. James had just stepped out of a black SUV, dressed in a charcoal tux, Vanessa at his side, clipboard in hand. She'd arranged every minute of the evening. He was the keynote speaker. The flyer said so. So did the massive poster by the entrance, the email confirmations, the RSVP list. But none of that mattered to the man at the door. "I need to see your credentials," the guard had said. James smiled politely. "James Bennett. I'm speaking tonight." The guard didn't even glance at the list. "Step aside, sir. We'll need to verify." Vanessa stepped in. "He's the guest of honor. He's literally on the banner." "Anyone can print a banner," the guard said. As James reached for his inner pocket, a second guard moved quickly, hand near his weapon. "Hands where I can see them." Vanessa's voice cracked. "He's getting his invitation." But the room had already turned. Dozens of eyes, white, wealthy, indifferent, locked on James. Not out of admiration, out of caution, calculation. He wasn't a tech visionary in that moment. He was a black man near a weapon, and they were ready to believe anything about him except the truth. Later, the organizer had come rushing over. Nervous laughter. Honest mistake. You know how it is. James hadn't replied. He gave his speech. He made them laugh. He smiled in photos. But a seed had been planted. One that sprouted today. Back in the present. James rubbed his thumb over the crease of his palm, grounding himself in the texture. That moment had never left his body. Trauma rarely did. It just changed zip codes. Vanessa turned to him. "You're thinking about the gala, aren't you?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She sat beside him. "They didn't see you then?" "Not really. They saw me," he said softly. "They just didn't believe me." Vanessa opened her tablet. "I dug up that night's footage. Press photographers. Red carpet reels. You were everywhere." James looked away. And still invisible. Then came the knock. The door opened, and a woman stepped in, older. Gray coat. Clipboard clutched like a shield. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Bennett, I'm with Public Affairs. We'd like to coordinate a statement." James looked at her like she was a ghost. "A statement?" "Yes. Something the airline can release to show our commitment to dialogue. Maybe even apologize if appropriate, Vanessa stood. If appropriate. The woman hesitated. We just want to manage the narrative. James stood slowly, eyes steady. I'm not interested in narratives. Mr. Bennett, I've already told my story. With silence. And then, without raising his voice, he added, now it's your systems that are speaking. The woman faltered. Well, I'll tell legal you declined. As she backed out, Vanessa turned back to James. They're scared. He nodded. Because silence doesn't mean weakness. He thought again about that gala, but not the guards, not the rich stairs. He thought about her, the catering assistant. Small frame, big eyes, nervous voice. She'd waited until after the event, as James was packing up. Mr. Bennett, she'd said softly. He turned. Yes, she wiped her hands on her apron. I just wanted to say, what you're doing. It matters. He blinked. Excuse me. You don't have to shout. She continued. You just have to keep showing up. We see you. Even if they don't. He'd asked her name. Amara, she'd said. And then she was gone. He'd never forgotten. Back in the present. Vanessa was staring at her phone. James, she said slowly. You're not going to believe this. She turned the screen. A TikTok had surfaced, grainy, fast, recorded by an airport worker. It showed James being told to step aside, the screen flickering red behind him. The caption. They tried to stop him. He stopped them instead. Over 2.1 million views in under an hour. Comments flooded the screen. Finally, someone who doesn't just speak power, he moves it. I've been denied boarding for less. He made the call. I felt that in my bones. James exhaled. This wasn't about a ticket. It never was. This was about every moment he'd been erased, reduced, randomly selected, or quietly excluded. It was about echoes that never faded. And now, the echo was loud enough to shake the sky. In a windowless conference room on the 38th floor of Cortex Systems' New York headquarters, 3 phones buzzed at once. No one answered immediately. Because in that room sat the people who had spent the last 7 years quietly preparing for this exact moment, though none of them had expected it to arrive in the form of a viral video and a gate agent's bias gone public. Sophia Mendez, Chief Technology Officer, turned down the volume on the TV playing live footage from JFK. James Bennett was on every screen. Or rather, the aftermath of his silence was. She looked at the others. Darius King, Chief Legal Officer, and Meiko Tan, Director of Global Strategy. Each held a tablet displaying the same 3 headlines: Black CEO grounds major airline. After discrimination incident, Cortex founder makes one call, entire network cancels who is James Bennett. And how did he do this? Meiko leaned forward. It started. Darius didn't look up. And you're sure it wasn't impulsive? Sophia shook her head. James doesn't do impulsive. He made the call, Meiko said. And now we move. Quietly. They began initiating Phase 2. It had no dramatic title, no secret name. It was simply listed in Cortex's internal roadmap as Clause 7B activation, client non-compliance response. But those who had created it knew better. It was the fail-safe. James had insisted on it 3 years ago, after the San Francisco gala. He'd returned to headquarters, jaw tight, eyes glassy with a calm rage, and said, next time they try to erase me, I want them to choke on the silence. So Sophia had built a switch into Cortex's core architecture. Clause 7B. Any partner company found in violation of anti-bias integration standards could be subject to a system-wide lockdown upon CEO directive only. No warnings, no second chances. The clause had never been invoked. Until now. Mako began contacting satellite teams across Atlanta, Chicago, and London. Darius opened a back-channel line to 3 civil rights attorneys who had once worked on privacy policy for the N8ACP, just in case. Sophia tapped into the Cortex data pipeline. I'm seeing mass cancellation triggers now, not just this airline. The entire Skylink alliance is in partial shutdown. Let it run, Mako said. Starve them slow. Meanwhile, back at JFK, the story was evolving, not exploding, not collapsing, evolving. Airport staff who'd once turned a blind eye were now whispering into radios, hesitating before enforcing standard procedure. One gate agent had even pushed back on her own supervisor. He has a valid ticket. Let him through. He doesn't look. I said, let him through. Vanessa noticed the ripple effect. She stood in the terminal's upper viewing deck now, just above Gate B7, watching people make small choices differently. Passengers began asking questions not to stir trouble, but to understand. Wait, did they really deny him for no reason? He showed his ID. He showed his boarding pass. They just saw skin, not status. A barista at the nearby cafe poured a latte and slid it across the counter toward a young black woman who had tears in her eyes. This one's on the house, she whispered. For James. That was how change began. Not with explosions, with ripples. Inside the Cortex satellite command post in Midtown, Sophia pushed out the first of many internal memos. Subject Partner Policy Breach Protocol engaged. All external service integrations have been suspended for non-compliant carriers. Internal diagnostics will continue. Stand by for reactivation protocols. She hit send. Then she looked up at the team. We go dark. Within seconds, all monitoring systems attached to the airline's internal apps went offline. Self-check-in kiosks rebooted. Mobile boarding systems timed out. Even in-flight communication apps began showing errors mid-flight. 1,000 little inconveniences started piling up into a single, global blockade. And still, no statement from James. That was the point. This wasn't about noise. It was about movement without warning, without spectacle. Back at the JFK lounge, Vanessa stepped into the private meeting space where James now sat alone. She handed him a small device, a Cortex tracking module linked to all current integrations. This is the grid, she said. We've pulled control. Sophia and the team are mobilizing. We've got our legal shields up. PR is on standby. James nodded, eyes on the flickering lights. Green meant operational. Red meant revoked. One by one, the lights were turning red. Vanessa leaned against the door. You're going to war without firing a shot. No, James said. I'm not going to war. Then what are you doing? He looked at her. I'm enforcing silence. Let them sit in what they created. Just then, her phone buzzed. Another alert. This one from Yolanda Washington. Journalist, friend, truth teller. The message was short. I'm at JFK. Press is already here. Let me in. We need to talk. This is bigger than today. Vanessa looked up. James nodded. Let her in, he said. It's time the truth had a microphone. Because while the airline scrambled to respond, to deflect, to rewrite, the real story was already moving, and it didn't need permission to fly. The pressure didn't drop like a hammer. It rose like steam, invisible at first, but building in every vent, every system, every executive inbox. At Skylink headquarters, the PR war room looked like a crime scene, laptops everywhere, coffee-stained papers covered in drafts of non-apology apologies, and a dry erase board covered in red underlines and circled phrases like, "Unfortunate misunderstanding, committed to diversity, we are listening." None of it worked. The internet had already chosen its villain, and it wasn't James. Every time the airline tried to post a clarification, their replies were flooded with screenshots of the incident, quotes from the video, and one 3-word retweet that was now more viral than their entire brand campaign. He didn't yell. It became a kind of rally cry. Because the silence was the weapon. James hadn't thrown a scene. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't even moved until it was over. That made it worse for them, because they had no chaos to blame, only themselves, inside Cortex's temporary control center. James sat in a leather chair facing a wall of screens, each streaming footage from airports across the country. Cancelled, delayed, rebooked. He said nothing. Vanessa scrolled on her tablet beside him, brow furrowed. "We're getting calls from board members. Some are demanding a walkback. One even offered a public apology package personalized." James didn't flinch. "Tell them they missed their window. I don't need an apology." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "What do you want?" Then James stared at the screen. Acknowledgement, change, and not the kind they write in brochures. The door opened, and Yolanda stepped in. No press badge, no boom mic, just a pen, a notepad, and the kind of presence that could part a sea of spin. She didn't speak at first. She just stood there, watching James. Then you finally pulled the trigger. James nodded. "And you knew it would be this big." He shook his head. "No. I just knew I was done making room for people who couldn't see me." Yolanda sat down across from him. "Then let's tell it right. Start from the moment you reached for your phone." Before he could answer, Vanessa's tablet pinged again. She frowned. "Oh no." James turned. "What?" She turned the screen. The gate agent, Melinda Shaw. She was giving an interview, live, on national TV, in uniform, and she was crying. Perfect. A chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Exclusive flight attendant speaks out, says she felt threatened." During viral incident. James didn't blink. He just leaned forward. "I want the full audio from that gate," he said. "I want security logs, radio traffic, time-stamped CCTV, everything." Vanessa was already moving. Yolanda scoffed. "She's playing the victim card. And she's playing it well," Vanessa added. "The comments are already turning at least on one side of the fence." James stood slowly, walked to the window overlooking the terminal. Down below, travelers were still trapped in chaos, some angry, some confused, some just watching. One child near the windows held up a homemade cardboard sign. It read, "Mom says, don't let them push us off the plane." James blinked. Hard. Because now, this wasn't just about boardrooms. It was about classrooms, living rooms, every room where dignity had been denied, and no one filmed it. Vanessa returned. "I've got airport security feed sinking in now. All angles." "Good," James said, "because the silence is starting to shake them." Upstairs, in the corporate C-suite of Skylink, the CEO, Richard Easton, paced like a man with no air. He turned to his chief counsel. "Can we spin this?" The lawyer didn't answer. "Can we fight this?" Still silence. "Then, what the hell are we supposed to do?" Finally, The VP of Compliance leaned forward, fingers interlocked. "Mr. Easton, we have a bigger problem." The CEO turned. "We've just been informed that 3 major sponsors are pulling their contracts. 2 unions are demanding audits. And Cortex Systems has now made their internal bias index tool public." "What does that mean?" "It means James just published our grade." Easton's voice dropped. Grade. The VP tapped her screen. A web page blinked open. Cortex Systems Equity Compliance Dashboard. Color-coded. Transparent. Brutal. Skylink's rating red. Non-compliant systemic patterns of discrimination detected. At that moment, every corporate inbox at Skylink HQ lit up with the same message from Cortex Illegal Comm Subject. "Your integration has been revoked." This is not a suspension. This is a severance. Our systems will not participate in your silence. The CEO sat down. Hard. Back at JFK, the air was shifting. Flight crews hesitated. Terminal workers glanced at each other, unsure whether to enforce rules written by a collapsing authority. The silence James unleashed had become pressure, and pressure was folding the walls in. Vanessa stepped closer. "They're cornered." James nodded. "Then let them sweat." Because pressure wasn't the problem. It was the purpose. And every second they tried to contain him, the system they built cracked louder. The revolt didn't begin on the runway. It started in the break rooms, in crew lounges and training centers, in Slack channels with anonymous usernames, in HR inboxes suddenly filled with letters that had been saved in drafts for months. It started from within. They called it the rebrand uprising, not because it was flashy or loud, but because it came from inside the very brand that had once hidden behind equity statements and polished inclusion campaigns. Now, that brand was cracking, and the people who made it run the flight attendants, ground staff, baggage handlers, and junior managers weren't just watching, they were mobilizing. At JFK, an overnight crew supervisor named Kamani Rhodes took a risk. He posted a short, direct message on his personal LinkedIn. "I've worked for this airline 14 years. I've been overlooked, ignored, and passed over more times than I can count. But I watched that video today of James Bennett making one call, and I realized something. The silence I've kept all these years hasn't kept me safe. It's kept them comfortable. No more." By morning, it had 3.4 million impressions, and 14,000 comments, half from current airline employees, half of them ready to follow. In a Los Angeles training center, 2 junior flight attendants approached their team lead during a safety workshop. "We don't feel comfortable enforcing gate protocol until we get guidance." What kind of guidance? Bias guidance. They didn't whisper it. They said it clearly, with folded arms and quiet courage. Meanwhile, at Skylink HQ, the diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI team typically boxed into quarterly reports and boilerplate memos received over 400 internal emails in 24 hours. But none of them asked for moderation. They asked for accountability. The most common subject line. How do we fix this from the inside? The company had spent years building a public brand rooted in professionalism and prestige. Sleek uniforms, soothing flight music, executive lounges named after visionaries. But underneath that surface was the quiet rot of status-based suspicion. James Bennett had ripped off the curtain, and now the stage crew was refusing to hit their cues. At Cortex, Makotan monitored the social analytics dashboard. Red spikes, heat zones, uprisings. We're seeing employee-led hashtags now. She said to Vanessa, "Fly right, uniform but invisible, gatekeepers of bias." Some of these are trending across staff platforms. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. They're turning the mirror around. They're tired of being pawns. Yolanda chimed in from across the room. It's what always happens. You build a brand off the backs of your people, and the second they realize it, the brand belongs to them. Vanessa nodded. And this time, they've got receipts. Meanwhile, in Boston, a flight crew walked off their scheduled shift not as protest, but as statement. They didn't stage a strike. They staged a teach-in. They invited local news and gave a 10-minute press conference outlining specific ways they had been told to watch certain passengers more closely, and how complaint protocols were coded. Their spokesperson, a Filipino-American flight attendant named Ren Bautista, stared straight into the camera and said, "We're not going to be the uniforms used to hide systemic bias anymore. If our jobs mean policing who looks like they belong in first class, we'd rather fly for someone else." The clip went viral. At Skylink HQ, a new strategy emerged out of desperation. They tried to rebrand the moment. An email blast hit inboxes globally at 8:03 a.m. Skylink recommits to inclusive travel CEO to announce new equity strategy in live broadcast. Vanessa saw it first. They're trying to spin it. Frame James as the spark for their corporate awakening. James stood behind her, arms crossed. "They're not fixing the system," he said. "They're trying to rename the chains." He walked over to the glass, looked down at the crowds in the terminal below. Dozens of passengers now carried handwritten signs. Some read, "Let him board." Others simply said, "We see you." James. He exhaled. They think a press conference can stop this. They think PR is a parachute, Yolanda said. But they're already free-falling. Across the country, something new began happening. Employees started resigning on camera, not out of rage, out of principle. A black gate agent in Detroit posted a 90-second video. "I won't be the face people associate with this silence anymore." A white pilot in Houston followed. "I used to think neutrality was professionalism. I was wrong. Silence is bias." In total, 114 resignations posted within 72 hours. Each tagged rebrandaprising. Each shared the same final sentence, "I'd rather fly for someone who sees me." At JFK, a young man handed his resume shaking slightly to a member of James's security team near the lounge. "I used to clean cabins," he said. "I've got my pilot's license now. I just want a shot." James, overhearing, walked out of the lounge. "What's your name?" he asked. "Marcus." James nodded. "You just got your shot, because while Skylink tried to rebrand, James and his quiet army were already rebuilding. The numbers didn't lie. They didn't cry. They didn't plead. They didn't protest. They simply exposed. The Cortex Systems Data Integrity Suite was not designed for drama. It was designed for defense. But in the hands of James Bennett, it became something more powerful than outrage. It became undeniable. At 10:12 EST, Cortex published a public dashboard with live analytics pulled directly from internal logs, consumer reports, airport filings, and facial recognition metadata tied to Skylink's operating systems. It was titled "Bias in the Boarding Zone," a 5-year retrospective. Yolanda posted the link with one sentence. "Let the numbers speak louder than the lies." By 10:37 a.m., the site had crashed from too much traffic. It went live again 5 minutes later with increased server capacity. Over 1.3 million users were logged in concurrently. The first chart, a heat map showing gate rejections by race. In 5 major airports, Black and Latino passengers were 7.8 times more likely to be flagged for secondary screening despite having valid credentials. The second chart. An overlay of flight upgrades. White passengers were offered seat upgrades at a 63% higher rate, even when loyalty points and ticket status were identical. And then came the kicker. A full list of internally documented incidents compiled using Cortex's proprietary sentiment recognition software, which had scanned over 4 million minutes of gate audio and recorded terminal interactions. Phrases like, "I don't think he's in the right line. We'll just double-check your boarding status, sir. She doesn't look like a platinum flyer." Each flagged, each time-stamped, each indexed, each tied to an employee ID. There were 4,762 instances. Vanessa stood in front of the monitor wall, jaw tightening with every new headline rolling in from media outlets. Cortex report confirms racial profiling at ScaleTech. CEO's data drop shakes. Airline industry. They didn't just see color, they acted on it at Skylink's HQ. Panic mutated into something else exposure. Executives crowded around their own monitors as the data unfurled like a forensic autopsy of their corporate soul. In the internal chat room, labeled Comms Priority, the messages came fast. Can we take legal action to stop the dashboard? Can we discredit the source? Can we deny the pattern? Then one final message from a senior compliance officer. It's your own systems. You licensed Cortex. You gave them the logs. We've been caught by our own surveillance. At Cortex HQ. James stood before the glass, watching the spread. Yolanda approached, phone in hand. BBC wants a statement. MSNBC too. Even Bloomberg. James shook his head. No interviews. Yolanda frowned. Why not? Because the numbers already said everything. Vanessa looked up from her tablet. Even employees are reacting. I'm seeing internal Slack screenshots where people are apologizing, like full essays. People admitting they've seen it happen and said nothing. Yolanda nodded slowly. That's because data does what speeches can't. It removes the excuse of not knowing. Meanwhile, in the JFK lounge, a flight attendant off duty, still in uniform, approached the security barrier. She wasn't corporate. She wasn't PR. She was just tired. My name is Justine, she said softly to the Cortex guard. Can I speak to Mr. Bennett? The guard hesitated, then relayed the message. James turned from the glass. Let her in. She entered slowly, eyes wide, palms open. I just wanted to say, I've worked here 9 years. I've seen this over and over. What happened to you wasn't an exception. It was a policy. Unwritten, but enforced. James studied her face. And now? She swallowed hard. I want to testify. On record. Yolanda stepped forward. Are you sure they'll retaliate? Justine nodded. They already did. Every day they made me smile and pretend it wasn't happening. James extended his hand. You just changed sides. Within the hour. Yolanda uploaded Justine's anonymous testimony to a secure Cortex archive. Her story was raw. We were told to keep first class a premium visual zone. That's what they called it. If someone didn't fit that image, we found ways to redirect them. Delays, double checks, and if they were black or brown, we used the phrase secondary boarding verification. I'm sorry, I didn't speak sooner. The upload went viral again, because the data was no longer just numbers. It had faces, stories, receipts. By sundown, a new phrase was trending. Pattern, not isolated. That night, as the world debated outrage versus overreaction, bias versus misunderstanding. James sat at his desk, alone in the upper atrium of Cortex. The sky beyond the glass was orange and violet. He didn't watch the news. He watched the dashboard. And when the red lights turned yellow airlines scrambling to respond, to repair, to spin, he didn't smile. He just whispered, "You can't rebrand numbers," because silence was powerful. But proof rewrote everything. The morning didn't break. It cracked. All at once, like ice under a loaded wing. One piece of news shattered the corporate illusion that Skylink Airlines could contain the damage. CNN's headline at 7:01 a.m. was only 5 words long. Bennett's data report confirmed. That word confirmed ignited a reaction. No apology ever could, because this time, it wasn't James speaking. It was a third-party government agency. The Federal Office of Civil Aviation Oversight, rarely known to move fast or publicly, had just released a joint bulletin validating the accuracy of Cortex's report. They had run a 48-hour audit using independent forensic AI and determined that not only was the report sound, it was statistically conservative. The bias was worse than the data suggested. Within the hour, 3 USEC senators tweeted demands for a federal inquiry into discriminatory practices in commercial airline operations. Then came the images. Screenshots from internal Skylink emails leaked onto Reddit by a whistleblower. Memos instructing staff to use visual discretion for boarding passengers, to enforce first-class standards with discretion, and to maintain brand image consistency in premium zones. It wasn't coded anymore. It was evidence. Vanessa stood in the Cortex command hub, staring at the screen in silence. Her tablet vibrated like it had a pulse. Messages, notifications, meeting requests. None of it mattered. Across the room, Yolanda was already typing the next headline. "The skies are burning. How one man's silence became a reckoning." James didn't say a word. He didn't need to, because now the story was no longer about his boarding denial. It was about all of them. Everyone who had been rerouted, rebooked, asked to wait just a moment while others passed by. Everyone who had been told, "We're just following protocol," as someone who didn't look like them breezed through. The story had tipped, and it tipped hard. Skylink's stock dropped 27% before noon. 3 major corporate partners pulled their sponsorship deals. A class action lawsuit, backed by the National Legal Alliance for Racial Equity, was filed in New York Superior Court. The plaintiffs, 143 passengers. The date range: 5 years. The claims systemic bias, targeted humiliation, and institutional gaslighting under the guise of gate protocol. Inside Skylink HQ, the CEO's private line rang off the hook. Lawyers, shareholders, media outlets. But none of them were the worst call. That came from inside the house. The chairwoman of the board. "We're losing control," she said flatly. "We already lost it," the CEO whispered. At JFK, meanwhile, James stepped into the terminal with no security detail, no press release, no entourage. He didn't need to speak, because everywhere he went, passengers paused. Not just black passengers. Everyone. They didn't stare in awe. They nodded in recognition, because his quiet resistance had become their language. And just as he turned the corner near the gate where it had all started, something unexpected happened. The flight crew applauded. 3 attendants, 1 pilot, 1 ground agent. Not loud, not performative, just a slow, solemn applause. James didn't bow, didn't wave. He just kept walking, until a small voice stopped him. "Mr. Bennett." He turned. A girl, maybe 12. Curly hair, holding a notebook. "I want to build planes," she said. "Like, own them, not just fly. My dad showed me your video. Can I shake your hand?" He knelt slightly and extended his. "You'll do more than build them," he said. "You'll name the sky after yourself." Behind them, reporters arrived too late. The story had already landed. The tipping point wasn't a headline. It was that moment. The girl, the hand, the promise. Elsewhere, on a Fox News panel, commentators argued about overcorrection and performative wokeness, but the narrative had slipped out of their reach because numbers were hard to spin, because testimonies were impossible to silence, and because James Bennett had weaponized stillness. Back at Cortex, the final analytics update of the day came through 6 million report downloads, 42 corporate resignations, 3 federal agencies requesting partnership on compliance reform. Vanessa turned to James, phone in hand. "Senator Donna Clemens wants to hold a hearing. Public. Televised. She wants you to testify." James stared out the window. "Tell her I'll be there," because the tipping point wasn't the end. It was the turn, the shift, the moment gravity leaned in the other direction, where silence stopped being survival and became revolution. The backlash didn't arrive in waves. It dropped like shrapnel. At 8:03 a.m., Skylink's legal team filed a cease and desist order against Cortex Systems, claiming James Bennett had weaponized proprietary integrations for personal vengeance. By 8:07, it had been leaked to the press. At 8:10, conservative media spun up the next phase of defense deflection. Billionaire uses tech power to blackmail airlines. One segment declared, "Is this the new racism reverse discrimination?" barked another. The turbulence index, a term once used by Cortex's data team to measure high-risk operational disruption, was now trending on social media, rebranded by James's critics as a metaphor for corporate chaos born of ego. By 9:00, the movement had a new enemy, the truth itself. Back at Cortex HQ, Vanessa flinched as she watched a pundit replay James's now iconic silent boarding moment with doctored subtitles. He refused to comply. The voiceover said, "He threatened the system." "What in the?" Vanessa muttered, slamming her laptop shut. "They're editing silence now." Yolanda had already expected it. She'd seen it before. They can't unprove the data, so they're trying to poison the narrative. James stood at the window, unmoved. "Let them," he said. "They want turbulence." Yolanda asked. James turned. They're about to learn what controlled dissent looks like, because this was no longer about exposure. It was about endurance. And the system, now aware that its mask had slipped, was flailing. At Skylink, mid-level executives began floating resignation notices with NDAs attached. HR managers held emergency meetings to prepare for a potential PR bleed. Internal memos urged employees to remain neutral online and avoid political discourse. But neutrality was no longer safe terrain. In Atlanta, a Skylink gate agent named Keisha Dorsey went live on Instagram with a simple message. "You told me to enforce premium visuals at the gate. What you meant was make black people feel out of place. Well, now you look out of place. In the mirror." Her stream was viewed over 3 million times, half from employees. The turbulence wasn't random. It was righteous. But like any high-altitude storm, it came with pushback. Vanessa scanned Cortex's secure messaging dashboard. "James, we've got deep fakes circulating." "Of what?" "Of you. Falsified audio of you saying things you never said. Someone's trying to build a pattern of aggression." James didn't blink. Where are they coming from? Anonymous IPs routed through offshore servers, but our cybersecurity team is triangulating. Good, he said, because turbulence leaves fingerprints. Meanwhile, Amara Lewis, who had mostly remained off-screen since the incident, released her first official public statement via a simple video filmed on her rooftop in Harlem. No fancy lighting, no makeup, no edits, just her. I used to sweep the back of these planes. Now they want to sweep what happened under the rug. James didn't ground the skies out of anger. He did it to show us the cracks we fly over every day. If this turbulence feels scary to them, good, because maybe they'll finally understand how it feels to board a flight and pray you'll be treated like a person. The video went viral, not in the flashbang way most stories did, but slow, resonant, like wind building pressure before it bends steel, at Cortex. Yolanda stood at the warboard, which now had flight maps replaced by narratives, article links, and opposition chatter. "We've hit saturation," she said. "They can't keep up." James nodded. So now they try to distort, and after that, they try to co-opt. Vanessa chimed in. Already happening. 2 major airlines just announced new equity pledges with 0 accountability metrics. Another hired a black spokesperson for a 30-second Super Bowl ad. James sighed. They think we're a marketing problem. They think we'll get tired. Vanessa added. James stepped forward. Then let's keep them awake. Across the country, journalists race to stay ahead of the next twist. But the turbulence wasn't just in headlines. It was in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in classrooms. A civics teacher in Memphis paused her lesson plan to show her students James's boarding clip. Afterward, she asked, "What did he say?" One student raised her hand. "Nothing," she replied. Another added, "But it was loud anyway. That was the thing. Turbulence doesn't always announce itself. It builds. It hums beneath metal, behind policies, under protocol until it hits the surface, and everything that pretended to be still gets shaken." Back at Cortex, Vanessa's screen lit up again. She scanned the message. "New attack strategy," she muttered. "An internal leak says they're preparing to challenge Cortex's license with the FAA. They want to ground us. They're trying to clip us before we take off." James leaned forward. "Then it's time we show them we've already left the tarmac. Because turbulence may shake the cabin, but it never scares the pilot who saw it coming." The internal rupture wasn't sudden. It split slowly like a hairline fracture down the middle of a polished facade. Inside Skylink's once confident corridors, a quiet war had begun. On one side, loyalty. Senior managers, crisis PR specialists, executives clinging to the narrative that this was all a misunderstanding. They issued statements about commitment to learning and offered cultural sensitivity training led by the same HR team that had ignored 2 years of internal complaints. On the other side, resistance. Employees, real ones who'd seen the truth on James Bennett's face and felt it resonate like a pulse. It started with an email, a simple internal memo sent to all staff by an anonymous employee. Subject line, "Who are we protecting the bodies?" I joined Skylink to help people travel safely, not to quietly gatekeep who looks worthy of a leather seat. If we stay silent now, we're not just complicit, we're contaminated, and I refuse. A flight attendant with eyes open. That message was forwarded 13,000 times in 48 hours. It was printed, taped, whispered. It was resistance in polyester and name tags. At Cortex. Vanessa tapped her screen. We're tracking an internal petition Skylink staff calling for the resignation of the VP of Passenger Experience. How many signatures, James asked. Over 6,000 talks. And growing. Yolanda raised her eyebrows. From inside the company, Vanessa nodded. Pilots, tech teams, even janitorial staff. They're using the same language. They're saying, James didn't embarrass us. You did. James looked out the window, voice low. That's the moment the power shifts. And it had. Because the longer Skylink clung to control, the more it looked like fear. They tried spin-releasing staged videos of smiling black passengers in first class, escorted by unusually cheerful white crew members. It backfired instantly. Comments lit up. Oh, now y'all remember we exist. Is this PR or parody? You're fixing the camera, not the culture. Then came the resignations. Real ones. Mid-level directors stepping down. Some sent exit letters to newsrooms. Some went live on TikTok. One, a white manager from guest services, said tearfully, I was told to let certain customers board faster without saying that out loud. They didn't need to. We all understood. I'm not waiting for this company to catch up. I'm leaving it behind. Meanwhile, James didn't tweet, didn't post a selfie, didn't say a word. Instead, he read every resignation letter, every testimony, and quietly sent 3 of those ex-employees an offer join Flight 1. No fanfare, just a single message from Vanessa. We're building something real. You in all 3 responded with the same phrase I've been waiting to matter. At Skylink's headquarters, the fracture deepened. The executive suite held emergency meetings to strategize. They invited diverse voices to sit at the table, but didn't listen. They hired a crisis consulting firm, but the firm's own junior analyst leaked a report warning, your employees are organizing against you. From inside, this isn't rebellion. It's an evolution. And then, like fire catching paper, it happened. An entire flight crew, Flight 283 from Chicago to Miami, refused to operate, not out of protest, but out of purpose. They issued a letter to Skylink, passengers, and the press. We love our jobs, but we love justice more. We will not fly a plane under a brand that denies bias while punishing truth. Until real reforms happen, not slogans, we are grounded. The airline scrambled to staff a replacement. Passengers applauded the crew. James watched the story unfold from the silence of his office. Vanessa walked in. You see what's happening? He nodded. They're not just leaving, she said. They're standing. At JFK, a line of uniformed staff stood near Gate B7, some off-duty, some on. None of them were speaking, but each wore a pin, a silver pin in the shape of a boarding pass, with the seat number 1A engraved on it. It was the number James had been denied. It was the seat that sparked the storm. Yolanda arrived, camera in hand, catching every silent protest, every shoulder square with dignity. And just before she snapped a photo, one staffer finally spoke. A woman in her 50s, graying hair in a tight bun. I've worked here 27 years, she said. Never thought I'd be afraid of telling the truth. Never thought I'd be proud to say I work for the people, not the protocol. Click. The image went viral within an hour. Headline, Skylink staff. Choose truth over loyalty resistance at 30,000 feet inside. Cortex HQ. Vanessa looked to James. They're ready to follow you. James shook his head slowly. No, he said. They're ready to lead themselves. Because this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every person who wore a uniform, who'd kept their head down, who had memorized the script but never believed in the story. And now they were rewriting it. one seat at a time. The collapse didn't begin with a bang. It began with a whisper inside the Skylink executive boardroom, a whisper from the company's longest-serving director, Edgar Lowry, who had sat on the board for 27 years, weathered 5 CEOs, and worn racism like an invisible cufflink. "We've become the story," he muttered, barely audible over the heated debate. Across the glossy table, the new chief communications officer pounded her fist. "We can't keep bleeding headlines. We need a statement. Now. One that clears us publicly and permanently." A junior board member pushed back, voice cracking. "There is no clearing this. We built the bias into the boarding script." And that's when Edgar stood. He looked around the room. Men in tailored suits, women in neutral blazers, all of them white, all of them rattled. He straightened his tie and said, "We've been flying on borrowed dignity. Now the debt's due." Then he turned and walked out. Resigned that afternoon. No press conference. Just a final memo emailed to every board member, titled, "This isn't turbulence, it's freefall," inside Cortex HQ. Vanessa read the memo aloud, while James and Yolanda listened in silence. For years, we preached efficiency while denying empathy. We let bias disguise itself as policy. And when the mask fell, we blamed the mirror. I will not be part of that anymore. James said nothing. Yolanda folded the printout and whispered, "The foundation just cracked." And it had, because Edgar Lowry was the first of the old guard to fall, but he wouldn't be the last. Across the airline industry, executive resignations multiplied. The dominoes began toppling fast. Lana Kingsley, VP of Global Passenger Strategy, stepped down, citing irreconcilable values. Thomas Whitaker, Director of Loyalty Programs, leaked an email he'd sent 3 years prior, warning about discriminatory gate profiling. Dolores Ng, Chief of International Partnerships, confessed publicly that she had been told to avoid certain activist airports for brand activations. Each exit came with either a confession or a condemnation, and each one peeled another layer off Skylink's shrinking defense. Meanwhile, Flight 1 was no longer an idea. It was a draft charter, a legal entity, and a growing roster of former airline employees who had quit their jobs and emailed Vanessa directly. "I want in. I've got 11,000 flight hours ready to fly with dignity. Tell James I'll start tomorrow for half pay if it means changing the skies." Within days, Vanessa compiled a spreadsheet titled The Exodus. It listed over 200 qualified applicants: pilots, engineers, customer care experts, DEI specialists, all leaving Skylink, all flying toward something better. Back at Skylink HQ, the board attempted its last line of defense. They formed a reputation stabilization task force, staffed with crisis managers, brand consultants, and 2 retired politicians. Their job: control the narrative. Their tools: money and manipulation. Their plan: announce a Skylink equity reboot, a new initiative framed around inclusive modernization, complete with photo ops, DEI workshops, and leadership summits. The language was clean, the optics polished, but the public smelled it for what it was: a controlled demolition wrapped in buzzwords. Yolanda posted a side-by-side breakdown on her news platform, Claim Reality. First of its kind, initiative filed 3 years late. Equity task force formed. No black leadership on board, James Bennett not mentioned. While still actively suing the company, by 6 p.m., the phrase equity reboot was trending for the wrong reasons. Is that what we call apologies now? You reboot a computer. You reform a system. We're not programs, you can't patch this with updates. Vanessa scrolled through the comments, frowning. They're not reading the room, she muttered. James looked up from his notes. They're trying to paint the fire as a feature. In a leaked Zoom recording from the Skylink task force, one executive was heard saying, "If we can just ride this out for 10 days, it'll blow over." Outrage doesn't have stamina, but outrage didn't need stamina anymore. It had strategy. At Flight 1's temporary planning hub in Lower Manhattan, James walked into a design room where a massive blueprint covered an entire wall. The new airline, the new culture, the new sky. Amara stood at the center, hands clasped behind her back. "They're folding," she said. "You see it?" James nodded. "They're not adjusting. They're reacting. They don't believe they were wrong," she added. "They believe they were caught." And she was right. Because Skylink wasn't collapsing from lack of defense. It was collapsing from an absence of belief. Their leaders didn't believe in accountability. Their brand didn't believe in inclusion. And their loyalty to silence, to status, to supremacy, was now the anchor pulling them down. Vanessa stepped into the room with a printed headline, "Skylink Board to vote on CEO's future amidst fallout." She handed it to James. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just nodded once and said, "Let the old guard fall. The runway's clearing." The old guard collapsed in silence. No grand televised apology. No boardroom confessional. Just a series of quiet exits wrapped in legal language and non-disclosure agreements. The kind of institutional disappearance that tried to erase guilt instead of owning it. But while Skylink hemorrhaged its top layers, Flight 1 was rising, not in headlines, in blueprints, in contracts, in morning meetings fueled by purpose instead of fear. Inside the modest Manhattan planning hub, the air buzzed with something unfamiliar in corporate aviation authenticity. No polished slogans, no legacy politics, just whiteboards covered in notes like, "What would comfort mean if we designed it for everyone? How do we make safety feel seen? No more gate scripts right from humanity." At the center of it all, Amara Lewis stood with a red marker in hand, drawing circles, arrows, timelines, her hoodie sleeves rolled up, her eyes sharp and unflinching. Behind her, 5 massive panels displayed different regions of the U.S., each tagged with keywords: justice, innovation, legacy, joy, healing. "We're not just building routes," she said. "We're building redemption." James watched from the corner, arms folded, listening. "Let them patch their leaks," she added. "We're pouring foundations." Vanessa stepped forward with a tablet. "Our startup runway fund just cleared $41 million. Mostly small donors. Some gave $10. Others just sent notes. You want to hear one?" James nodded. Vanessa read aloud. "I've never flown anything but coach. But I'm giving what I can so my son can grow up in a world where black pilots don't feel like unicorns." No one spoke for a full 10 seconds. Then Amara said softly, "That's our North Star." By the end of that day, Flight 1 had secured a partnership with a small regional carrier willing to lease 5 aircraft, a legal team backed by 2 civil rights foundations, an advisory board filled with former airline workers, equity advocates, and 3 aviation engineers who had resigned from Skylink the week prior. But the real victory: the crew roster, not a spreadsheet, a mural, painted on the wall by a local artist, faces of every person joining the mission: black pilots, indigenous mechanics, Afro-Latina cabin managers, Middle Eastern security specialists, Southeast Asian air traffic interns. Every face painted with care, every gaze forward. No one on the wall was famous, but they were all firsts in their families, their cities, their generations. "This isn't an airline," Amara said. "It's a skyward apology to everyone who ever had to shrink to fit inside someone else's cabin." Meanwhile, Skylink tried to stay airborne. They rushed out new advertisements, stock photos of smiling passengers from every ethnicity, hashtags like "better boarding" and "everyone belongs." It didn't land, because the public had already moved on toward something real. Flight One's teaser campaign, shot by Yolanda's in-house documentary crew, dropped quietly but struck with force. No actors, no scripts, just footage of former crew members sharing what they would do differently if they could rebuild air travel from scratch. "I wouldn't greet passengers with a smile. I'd greet them with a welcome that means something. I wouldn't profile. I'd protect. I'd stop pretending first class means first human." The final clip showed a black pilot placing his hand on a yoke and whispering, "They said I was diversity. I say I'm direction." Within 24 hours, the video hit 15 million views. Meanwhile, Flight One's official name, revealed during a press Q&A, sent shivers Flight One. Because everyone deserves a first time that's fair. By then, journalists had stopped asking if James would return to the industry. He wasn't returning. He was redefining it. Inside Cortex HQ, James reviewed a series of supplier contracts, ground handling, catering services, in-flight media providers. Each company was run by women, minorities, small businesses locked out by legacy airlines for being too small or too radical. Not anymore. "I want the system to know," he told Vanessa. "We're not borrowing their ladder. We're laying our own runway." Vanessa smiled, and painting it rose gold. Meanwhile, Amara walked into a meeting with the CEO of the regional carrier they'd partnered with. He offered her a seat, then slid over a thick envelope. "We reviewed your proposals," he said. "Our board is split." Amara raised an eyebrow. "Split half of them say it's too bold, too risky, too soon. And the other half, they want to give you full operational control over the new fleet." Amara didn't blink. Why, the man smiled. "Because our daughters are watching." That night, as the city dimmed and the skies above lit with streaks of red-eye departures, James and Amara stood on the rooftop of the planning hub. No press, no cameras, just them. "We're really doing this," she said. James nodded. "Not from revenge." "No," she said, "from restoration." And behind them, the world that tried to break them continued to crumble bit by bit, lie by lie. But before them, the sky was open. They weren't done. Even as Flight One rose from the rubble like a quiet revolution dressed in navy and rose gold, the old system was sharpening its claws. Resistance didn't roar. It rebranded. At 6:42 a.m., Vanessa stepped into the Flight One planning hub, holding a steaming coffee and a look that could freeze engines mid-air. "James. Amara. We've got a problem." Amara, halfway through organizing onboarding sessions for newly hired crew. Looked up. "Please tell me it's not another fake DEI campaign." Vanessa flipped her tablet around. The headline read, "New Equity Airline Emerges, Backed by Skylink Partners, Introducing Project Horizon." The images that followed looked familiar. Too familiar. Photos of smiling black and brown passengers stepping onto aircraft with freshly painted logos. Carefully staged crews in diverse uniforms. A tagline. "We all fly better together. Amara whispered. "They're trying to copy us." Vanessa nodded. "They're calling it an equity-first airline experience. But look closer. Same cities, same routes, even similar plane interiors. They've poached half our design aesthetic." James, who had been reviewing policy drafts in a nearby room, stepped in, and the leadership. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. White CEO, all-male executive team. They hired one black spokesperson, a former ad agency model. Amara's jaw tightened. So they couldn't kill us in public. Now they're trying to absorb the movement. Yolanda chimed in from the corner. They've studied the headlines, tracked the hashtags. They know the world wants what we're building. They just don't want us to build it. James nodded. "This isn't opposition," he said. "It's appropriation." The resistance had resurfaced not as outright attacks, but as strategic mimicry, a corporate shell painted with inclusivity, but hollow at the core. And the strategy was clear. Flood the market, confuse the public, and dilute Flight One's moral clarity into just another branding war. But Flight One wasn't a brand, it was a correction. Amara stepped toward the whiteboard, grabbed a marker, and wrote in bold red letters, "They want to beat us to the sky," Vanessa added. "And they're rushing." They've announced a soft launch next month, just days ahead of ours. Silence followed. James finally spoke. "Then we change our altitude. Within hours." Flight One shifted into offensive formation. The plan wasn't to play defense, it was to elevate. Yolanda's media team released a new trailer this time, narrated by actual Flight One crew members. No actors, no edits, just people who had been denied dignity finally owning the air. A flight instructor, formerly laid off for speaking up, looked into the lens and said, "They tried to shut us down. Now they're trying to wear us. But you can't copy culture, and you can't buy belonging." The trailer ended with one tagline: "Flight One, you'll know when you're home." Within 36 hours, it outperformed every Project Horizon ad combined. Meanwhile, James assembled his executive team. "Start compiling receipts," he instructed. "Everything they've stolen: artwork, language, onboarding methods. We're not suing yet, but we're documenting everything." Vanessa nodded, already creating a folder called Reverse Theft. Outside the bubble of strategy and response, Project Horizon ramped up its counter-campaign. They enlisted influencers, some unaware of the mimicry. They launched paid interviews, glowing profiles, and think pieces with titles like "The New Faces of the Friendly Skies." But their mistake, they tried to hide who was funding them. Flight One's legal team uncovered that Project Horizon was secretly backed by the same 4 legacy airline boards that had refused to sign James's equity clause 3 years ago. Vanessa posted the receipts, publicly. No hashtags, no spin. Just scanned financial documents with the caption, "You don't get to steal the revolution and pretend you built it." The post lit up in minutes. But the moment that broke the illusion came from within. A whistleblower. A junior creative strategist at Project Horizon Biracial, gender non-conforming, mid-20s, posted a 5-minute video to their personal YouTube. "They brought me in to help them look diverse, but every time I brought up equity, they told me to keep it inspirational. Flight One isn't just an airline, it's a chance we've waited our whole lives to see." It went viral in less than 4 hours. James watched it in silence. Amara wiped her eyes when it ended. Not from sadness, from fury laced with clarity. "They're scared of what we built," she said, "because it wasn't born in boardrooms." James nodded. It was born in boarding denial. That evening, Yolanda dropped the final blow. A full-length article, The Imitation Game. Why Flight 1 Can't Be Cloned. It didn't attack Project Horizon. It just told the truth. About the girl who'd been told to stand aside at a gate. About the man who made one call that grounded an empire. About the quiet uprising that couldn't be franchised. By morning, public opinion had turned again. Project Hijack trended on X. Only Flight 1 dominated Instagram. And in the comments, thousands of people saying what no PR budget could fake. We know the difference, because resistance may resurface, but authenticity never retreats. They had tried silence, then slander, then mimicry. Now the system launched its last resort sabotage. At 7:22 a.m. Vanessa entered the Cortex war room, holding her phone like it was burning her hand. James, Amara, we've been breached. Amara froze. Define breached. Vanessa dropped her tablet on the conference table, revealing a live news feed. National headline. Breaking ticker. Flight 1 hit with discrimination lawsuit. Alleges racial bias in hiring practices underneath the bold type. A single subheading slithered. Anonymous plaintiffs claim exclusion of white applicants from leadership roles. Amara's voice was cold. They're calling us racist. Vanessa nodded. And they've filed it as a class action. James closed his laptop slowly. Who's behind it? Vanessa tapped the screen again. Same law firm that defended Project Horizon's parent company last year. It's a hit job. Yolanda stepped in. They've reframed the narrative, from revolution to reverse racism. James stared at the screen, unmoving. This isn't a lawsuit, he said. It's a stall tactic, and a distraction. Vanessa added, the timing's too perfect. Their soft launch is in 4 days. They want us off message. Amara folded her arms, eyes hard. Then we counter-strike. The room quieted. James looked up. No denials. No panic. No crisis statements. Vanessa blinked. Then what we fight with transparency. James said, we don't defend equity, we define it. Within the hour, Cortex's legal and communications teams moved into synchronized motion. Vanessa led the counteroffensive. First receipts. Flight 1's entire hiring process resumes. Interviews, review panels, scoring rubrics was documented and published on a public transparency portal titled How We Hire, Who We Include, Why It Works. Not polished, not simplified. Just raw numbers and names with consent. Second, the truth files. Yolanda uploaded 3 anonymous testimonies from white employees already inside Flight 1. I've never felt more seen than here. This isn't exclusion, it's excellence without the usual gatekeepers. If you call this reverse racism, you've never worked under real racism. Third, the panel. James and Amara scheduled a live stream, a full hour, with no pre-screened questions, moderated by 3 independent journalists from diverse platforms. The subject who gets to lead the skies. It wasn't a press event. It was a reckoning, live on screen. And it opened with Amara. She didn't read from a script. She spoke like she was speaking for her past self, the one who'd once been told she could clean planes, but never fly them. This isn't about excluding anyone. It's about finally including everyone without apology. We don't filter by race. We filter by readiness to rebuild. And if that makes people uncomfortable, it says more about what they've accepted as normal. Then James stepped forward. He said nothing for 5 full seconds. Then looked into the lens. We are not reversing discrimination. We are reversing permission. The unspoken permission the old system gave to exclude, to profile, to assume. Flight 1 is not revenge. It's a realignment. The stream went viral in real time, but the real strike came next. Vanessa, now managing a discreet digital forensics team, traced the lawsuit's plaintiffs. 2 were shell identities. One was a fired contractor with ties to Project Horizon's PR firm, and one perhaps most damning was a former Skylink executive using a false name. Vanessa uploaded the proof. Caption fake plaintiffs. Real fear. Across platforms. Support for Flight 1 surged. But James knew that wasn't enough. They needed more than proof. They needed a pivot. Bring the movement forward, he told Yolanda. Out of the courts. Out of the shadows. So Yolanda produced a documentary short titled "The Skies We're Building." It aired on 3 streaming platforms in 48 hours. It wasn't just about James or Amara. It was about crew members, engineers, customers, all reflecting on what it means to be treated like an outsider in a space supposedly built for all. The final quote, a Nigerian-born flight technician saying, "Inclusion isn't a statement, it's a structure." Meanwhile, Vanessa received the final blowback file. A leaked internal recording of Project Horizon's legal counsel saying, "We don't need to win in court. We just need to keep them in court." James listened to it twice, then handed the file to Amara. "We don't fight this in silence anymore," she said. "No." James agreed. "We fight it in flight." The next morning, Flight 1 launched its Equity in Altitude campaign. Every pilot profile published. Every route mapped with intention. Every flight crew's story told by themselves, no narrator required. And one tagline, "You can't sue a sky that finally sees you." As for the lawsuit, it unraveled within days. The judge dismissed it on the grounds of falsified identities and strategic obstruction. James didn't gloat. Amara didn't post a single tweet. They didn't need to, because the system had launched a missile, and Flight 1 countered with a mirror. The tarmac didn't lie. It bore no politics, no spin, no press releases. It simply reflected what was real, who got to walk forward, and who was asked to step aside. On a humid Thursday morning at JFK, reality landed like a descending jet, quiet at first, then unstoppable. Because today was the first test flight of Flight 1. No ribbon cutting, no CEO photo ops, just a narrow jet bridge, a single aircraft, and a gate where the truth had once been denied. James stood near the window overlooking the runway, wearing a navy blazer with no logo. Amara stood beside him, hands clasped, watching the plane pull in sleek, white, trimmed in rose gold. On the tail, a pair of upward-facing wings shaped like a fist. Reporters waited beyond the glass, crew prepped behind the scenes, but no one spoke, because today wasn't about noise. It was about witnessing. Gate 1A, the same designation as the seat that had sparked the entire collapse. Vanessa approached with the manifest. All passengers pre-screened. No special selections. First come, first fly. Every seat paid for by real people, no comps, no influencers. James nodded. Then let them board. The gate opened. The first passenger was a retired Tuskegee airman, 92 years old, in full uniform. He paused at the threshold, looked at James, and offered a slow salute. James returned it with a nod, eyes damp. Next, a black mother with twin toddlers, one asleep, one clutching a toy airplane. She smiled wide and whispered, "They're going to remember this flight forever." Then came an immigrant father with his teenage daughter, a white senior couple who had driven from Vermont to be part of history. A young black woman with a notebook labeled aviation school applications. It wasn't just boarding. It was undoing. Undoing years of whispered assumptions, of side glances, of phrases like, "Are you sure you're in the right line?" It was healing, loudly, visibly, and the cameras captured it all not for marketing, but for memory. Back inside, Yolanda's production team streamed it live. No commentary, just images. The boarding line, unfiltered. The crew, diverse and calm. The pilot black, female, mid-30s, standing at the door with her hand outstretched, saying only one word. Welcome. On every screen across social media, the caption read, "Truth on the tarmac Flight 1's first departure." And then the moment came. Amara approached the gate herself. She wore a simple charcoal suit. No branding, just legacy. One of the reporters tried to yell a question, something about market share or legal retaliation, but she didn't answer. She just stepped onto the plane and stood in the aisle, microphone in hand, patched into the PA system. I want to say this out loud, for the record, for the skies, for everyone who has ever been questioned simply for existing. You belong here. You always did. This plane isn't taking off because we're angry. It's taking off because we're ready. Applause filled the cabin. Outside, Vanessa got a ping from a rival airline's Slack leak. She opened it and grinned. They're panicking. Project Horizon just pulled their launch date back again. Their CEO said, and I quote, "Let them burn out first." James smirked. Then let's make our flame sustainable. The final passenger boarded. A young girl, maybe 10, clutching a model plane. She looked up at James, wide-eyed. "Are you the guy from the video?" He knelt. "Which one? The one who made them cancel all the flights?" He smiled. "Yeah, that was me. Why'd you do that?" James paused, then said, "Because someone told me once that quiet men in suits don't change the system." So I got loud with silence. The girl nodded. "That's cool. I'm going to be a pilot." He handed her a pin from his pocket. Flight 1, silver. 1A engraved. You already are. The doors closed. The wheels rolled. The plane pulled away from the gate, the very same gate where James had once been told he didn't belong. Now the same tarmac was watching him rise. Live feeds across the country showed the moment. One jet, one movement, one truth. The nose tilted up, engines roared, and for the first time in aviation history, a black-owned, equity-led airline took to the sky with the whole world watching. James turned to Vanessa. "We've lifted off." She looked up from her tablet, where news alerts were piling in. Historic first flight redefines industry passengers. Call it healing at 30,000 feet. Airline built from resistance becomes symbol of change. Yolanda whispered behind them. This is the footage that plays in courtrooms, in classrooms, in history reels. Amara's voice came through the flight intercom overhead. To everyone watching, wondering if this is real. It is. You're not dreaming. This is the sky you've been waiting for. And from that truth-touched tarmac, a revolution didn't just take off. It became air. It wasn't just a flight. It was a course correction measured not in altitude, but in accountability. From the moment Flight 1 broke through the cloud line, the redemption began not for James, not even for Amara, but for the passengers, crew, and generations who had learned to board quietly, shrink silently, and accept turbulence that didn't come from the sky. 36,000 feet above ground. Amara stepped into the cockpit mid-flight. The co-pilot, Jade Simmons, one of the first black women in her airline academy to graduate top of her class, smiled and nodded. "It's yours," she said. Amara blinked. What Jade stood, motioned to the captain's chair. "Your airline, your vision. You sit here for this." Amara hesitated, then stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she rested them on the controls not to fly, but to feel. This was the same woman who once picked up trash in the aisles of Skylink flights. Now she was seated where only captains sat. No permission asked. No apology given. Down in the cabin, passengers moved with ease. Flight attendants laughed naturally. A woman in row 8 whispered to her daughter, "You're watching history." Meanwhile, on the ground, Flight 1's historic journey trended across every media platform. Flight path to redemption from gate to glory. We board now at Cortex HQ. Vanessa paced beside a massive screen wall of analytics. "James," she said into her earpiece, "we're at 73 million live views across platforms. Our brand engagement is outpacing every major airline combined. We haven't even launched a full fleet yet." James stood in the boardroom, arms crossed, gazing at a looping clip of the takeoff. But his mind wasn't on numbers. It was on what came next. "Make the message bigger than the moment," he said. "Already done," Vanessa replied. "Local newspapers are calling Flight 1 a model for urban inclusion, and 3 city councils are proposing airport contracts just to be part of the movement, and the FAA requesting a meeting, not to regulate, to learn." James smiled. Now that's new airspace. Meanwhile, in Project Horizon's camp, chaos brewed. Their soft launch, which had already been delayed twice, was now unofficially on hold. Internal Slack messages leaked. One executive wrote, "We underestimated them. They didn't build a brand. They built belief. And now we're the costume." Back on Flight 1, Amara stood mid-aisle as the cabin lights dimmed for landing prep. She picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying with us today. This wasn't just a route from New York to Atlanta. It was a journey from erasure to existence. We didn't rewrite the manual. We rewrote the motive. And to the little girl in seat 14B who said she wants to fly one day, you already are." In 14B, the girl waved, the cabin clapped, some cried, and for the first time, applause during landing didn't feel like a reflex. It felt like a release. The jet touched down. Wheels kissed the runway like a promise, and the terminal ahead. Waiting with a line of staff members from other airlines off duty. No PR incentive, just there to watch the doors open. One held a sign. "We're next." Another Flight 1 opened skies and eyes. As Amara exited first, cameras flashed, but she didn't pause. She walked straight into the crowd and hugged a janitor wearing an old Skylink vest. "I watched your flight," he said. "I flew it for you," she replied. Inside the terminal, a spontaneous press conference erupted, but James didn't lead it. He stood off to the side as Amara stepped up to the microphones. "You asked us what Flight 1 is. It's not a protest. It's a prototype. A glimpse of what it looks like when the sky stops choosing who gets to feel safe. We didn't come to make history. We came to make habits." Reporters exploded with questions, but Amara answered only one. "What now?" She smiled. "We fly farther." Behind her, 5 newly painted planes waited in hangars, each with different tail colors, each with its own mission, one for community healing flights, one for equity training journeys, one for low-income first-time flyers. This was Flight 1, but not the only flight, and far from the last. Back at Cortex, Vanessa played the final report of the day. Donations had surged. Partnership offers flooded in. Legacy pilots, once silent, now spoke out. One anonymous quote from a former Skylink captain echoed through the hall. "I used to think we'd never see skies like this. Now I just want to land long enough to be part of it." James finally sat, looking out the window. No planes in view, just clouds moving like soft thunder. Behind him, Yolanda spoke. "Redemption isn't a finish line." James nodded. "It's a gate you walk through this time without apology." And just then, Amara's voice came through his phone again. "Live on a late-night show. Flight 1 isn't mine. It belongs to every person who was ever told, 'You don't belong in this line.' Well, we made a new line, and this time, it boards in dignity. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday, but history doesn't follow calendars, it follows courage. And on this particular Tuesday, Flight 1 wasn't taking off from JFK, Atlanta, or Chicago. It was departing from Washington, D.C. The invite had come quietly. From the Senate Subcommittee on Transportation Oversight, an open hearing, televised, live. The subject, equity, aviation, and the future of public trust. And sitting at the witness table centered under the Capitol dome's flickering lights were James Bennett and Amara Lewis. James wore no tie, just a deep navy suit. Subtle, commanding. Amara wore white, like armor, like clarity. The chamber was full. Senators, journalists, activists, lobbyists, families. Screens overhead displayed a single phrase: "The final flight reckoning at 30,000 feet." Chairwoman Dana Clemens tapped her mic. "Mr. Bennett, Miss Lewis, thank you for being here. The floor is yours." James leaned forward, calm, measured. 3 years ago, I was pulled aside at a gate, not because my ticket was invalid, but because my presence made someone uncomfortable. I said nothing. I made a call, and the system responded not with apology, but with panic. He paused. We didn't ground the airline that day. We grounded the myth that professionalism and discrimination can fly side by side. The room was silent. Then Amara spoke. "I was once told I was good enough to clean aircraft but not command them. So I left. And now, I hire pilots." One senator leaned forward. "What makes Flight 1 different?" Amara didn't hesitate. "We don't check diversity at the hiring stage. We bake it into the blueprint. Our leadership isn't decorative, it's directional." The chamber buzzed. Another senator asked, "Do you believe legacy airlines can reform?" James answered slowly, "I believe they'll try. But no amount of training can fix a system built on exclusion. It's not a matter of repainting aircraft. It's about rewiring altitude. Across the country, people watched from airports, classrooms, office lobbies. Every screen carried their testimony. Every silence between words hummed like jet engines. And then the senator from Arizona asked what everyone else avoided. "So what do you want?" James didn't flinch. "We want access. We want policies that prioritize inclusion over aesthetics. We want gate logs made public, boarding data indexed by race and outcome, a third-party equity audit across the industry, and the next generation of aviation leaders to reflect the passengers they serve." Chairwoman Clemens nodded. "And if we don't," Amara's voice cut through, "then we'll keep flying around you." Applause broke out. From the balcony, from senators' staffers, from the hallways beyond the chamber doors. It was unofficial, but it was unmistakable. That night, back at the Flight 1 hangar, the team gathered. Vanessa walked in, carrying a folder. The FAA just released a statement. She read, "Flight 1 has passed all federal certifications. Their model will be used in our upcoming Equity and Access Reform Initiative. A new standard has been set." Cheers erupted. Technicians clapped. Pilots fist-bumped. Flight attendants hugged. But James sat quietly, watching the nose of the aircraft resting just beyond the hangar doors. Not moving. Not yet. Speech. Yolanda prompted. James stood, cleared his throat, then raised his voice just enough to be heard. "This isn't our final flight. It's the final gate we needed to walk through. No more side eyes. No more whispered refusals. No more being tolerated in a space we helped build." He gestured to the aircraft. "They called us passengers. We became pilots. They called us anomalies. We became architects." Amara stepped beside him, her voice steady. "To every black girl who was told she could only pass drinks in first class. We're building cockpits now. To every immigrant who boarded with fear, we're building skies that know your name. And to the gate agent who tried to decide where James Bennett belonged. We thank you, because you're no-birthed our yes." The room went still, then erupted. Laughter. Tears. One by one, employees placed their hands on the tail of the aircraft like a blessing, and then came the signal. The final flight of Flight 1's inaugural series, coded F1X, would take off at sunrise. No press, no passengers, just crew. One plane, one path forward. Amara piloting, James co-piloting, Vanessa sitting in the jump seat, Yolanda capturing every moment in quiet awe. They took off from runway 17 smooth as silk. The sun rose to greet them, and below a world still trying to catch up. As the wheels lifted and the nose tilted skyward, James looked out the window and whispered, "This is what it feels like when no one can deny you gravity." Flight 1 wasn't a plane anymore. It was a promise kept. 1 year later, no drama, no scandal, just progress. The air had changed, not completely, not perfectly, but permanently. It wasn't just that Flight 1 had succeeded. It was that the idea of Flight 1 could no longer be unimagined. Inside the brand-new headquarters just outside Atlanta, a wall made of glass faced an open runway where 5 white and rose gold jets were being refueled. Each one had a name etched in cursive near the cockpit. Not founders, not investors. Names like Amara Lewis, Rhea Holloway, Malik Coach Patterson, Jade Simmons, Mrs. Adams Row 14B. They weren't just commemorated, they were recognized. James stood near the window, wearing the same watch he had worn that day at Gate 1A. But now, time felt different. Slower. Earned. Behind him, the walls of the HQ bore murals of real faces, not filtered stock models, but employees, passengers, community leaders, kids who'd taken their first flight ever on a Flight 1 plane. Vanessa entered, holding a new report. "You want the good news first or the bigger news?" James smiled. "Always start small." She handed it over. "For the second quarter in a row, Flight 1 has the highest customer satisfaction rating in the country." He nodded. "And the bigger news." She turned her tablet around. On the screen was an email. Subject line, White House Transportation Council, keynote invitation. Message body, we would like Mr. James Bennett and Ms. Amara Lewis to co-chair our National Roundtable on Inclusive Travel Infrastructure. Your work has become a model for change. James read it twice, then once more for the meaning behind the words. They weren't just being asked to speak. They were being asked to lead. From across the office, Amara approached, her pace confident, her voice light. "You see it?" she asked. He nodded. "I also see what comes next." She laughed softly. "You never sit still, do you?" "I sat still once," he said, "and it grounded $1 billion company." Outside, a small tour of students walked past the window. Middle schoolers, wide-eyed, whispering. One girl waved when she spotted Amara. Amara waved back. "They've seen more in a year than I did in 20. Yolanda entered next, camera bag over her shoulder. Media's setting up. "You ready for what James asked?" She grinned. "The 1-year anniversary documentary interview. Remember, you promised me 1 take. No edits." James raised an eyebrow. "And if I say no, I'll use all the outtakes of you forgetting people's names." He laughed. They walked to the recording room, glass-walled, natural light, no stage. James sat. Yolanda adjusted her camera. "This doesn't need to be perfect," she said. "Just tell them what this was." He looked into the lens. It was never about a seat. It was about who they thought deserved to sit. He paused. "I wasn't loud. I didn't throw things. I just stood still. And in that stillness, the truth got louder than anything else." Cut. Yolanda gave a thumbs up. Next, Amara took the chair. She didn't rehearse. They thought this was about revenge. But Flight 1 was always about restoration. "We didn't shut down the skies. We cleared them." Later that day, the team gathered in the open atrium. No podiums, just folding chairs, sunlight, and legacy. James stood beside Amara and raised his glass. "To the moment they told us we didn't belong, and the movement that answered back." Cheers. But the moment wasn't about applause. It was about intention. Because this wasn't the story of a black man denied a seat. It was the story of what happens when he chooses to rise anyway. It wasn't the story of a flight attendant with prejudice. It was the story of an entire industry built to normalize that moment, and one flight that finally said, "No more." 6 months later, a little girl named Eden stood on a makeshift stage at her elementary school in Charlotte, North Carolina. Her science fair project: how to build an airline that makes everyone feel safe. Her inspiration, a laminated boarding pass, Seat 1A Flight 1. Backstage, her teacher asked where she wanted to go when she grew up. Eden pointed to the sky and said, "Wherever people like me don't have to prove they belong." And that was the real victory. Not the lawsuits dropped, not the fleets expanded, not even the industry reforms now modeled after Flight 1's hiring protocols. The victory was that a door had opened, and no one would ever close it again without being seen. Because the skies didn't just change, they remembered. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.